Picture the scene. You've moved to a new house and invited over to a neighbour's barbecue. You and your better half have a pack of burgers, a homemade salad and a bottle of Pinot, and you wander over. Your friendly neighbour takes your stash and then introduces you to Mary and John. First question, unless you're commenting on the weather, of course. So what do you do? Why do we do that? Are we more than our titles? Nice story, Bridge, but what's that got to do with leadership? Come and find out in So What Do You Do?
So Bobby, in our last gift episode, you touched on this idea of how maybe in the West we're obsessed with, I don't know that you said obsessed, but maybe I'm putting that into it, with how we define ourselves in terms of what we do. And it's a question that we tend to get to know people by going, what do you do, rather than who are you? And so the focus of this mini was the idea that is leadership a title, and that actually there are lots of people who are leaders without actually being officially a leader or that being their role in their work. So yeah, that was where we were going on this. And so have you got gifts, or do you want to do a little intro into where your thinking was on this?
Yeah, I think I may well have been the one that when we were looking at what sort of things that we could do, that I said, how about this one, without thinking about would it be easy to go and find gifts for it. But this for me came about from a LinkedIn post I saw some time ago, interestingly, from the Centre of Army Leadership. And it's a quote, I think it will be correlated with somebody, but they haven't suggested who the author of the quote was. But it was, positions are temporary, ranks and titles are limited, but the way you treat people will always be remembered, which sort of put me in mind of the Maya Angelou quote, which is similar around, I've learned that people will forget about what you say and will forget about what you did, but people will never forget how you made you feel. And so I think when I conflated the two of them about what is this thing, title and role, and yes, we were talking in the last episode that TEDx speaker Eric Sandop that I was talking about says that we're more likely to, when we're introduced to people, to ask, what do you do, rather than saying, who are you? And so for me was where it all came from. And now for our gifts, let's get back into, well, what does that mean in terms of leadership? So the first gift that I came across was actually a website which is entitled The Untitled Leader. And there are some great blog pieces on there and great resources all about exactly this topic of how do you lead rather than leading from your title or from your role. There's one great article that I came across in there is Leaders Without Titles, Unlocking the Power of People. And what this article talks about more so, and the link I've put in specifically takes you to start with this article as a starter for 10, but then I would encourage you to go and have a look around the website as well, is about fellowship. And I know that if we go back to the military, we often talk about fellowship as well. And that whole element about people can be real leaders and they have no title at all in organisations. And those are the people that you should be spot checking, because they're the ones that will corral teams, that will get people together. People will want to follow them. People will want to listen to them. And there are people with this innate quality that have them lead. And they don't need a whistle to get, like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, to get a whole pile of rats to follow them. They are doing things. And all of those qualities that we talk about with leaders around integrity and empathy and motivation and communication and all of those things that we've been talking about, they do it anyway, and they haven't needed a title in order to do it. And those are the people that really interest me, and those are the people that I think do have that of the unlocking of others. So it's a great website.
Yeah, I think we're going to be very much on the same page in this one. My gift is very similar. It's from a website called ProClinical, titled How to Be a Leader Without a Title. It talks about the fact that leadership is a skill rather than a role, and that then it sort of goes through some of those skills, which we've already talked about, that benefit everyone, even if you're not necessarily in a leadership role. So decision-making, creativity, communication, empathy, problem solving. And so, of course, all of those are really useful in followership as well, but are also signs of a leader. And then it gives some insights into sort of how you can demonstrate leadership even if you aren't in a titled role. And that's things like thought leadership, being part of associations, looking at solutions that may not be part of your role. And obviously, I guess, there is a caveat with this, that if you're not in an organization that has a healthy feedback culture, sometimes that can be very threatening to leaders or managers who maybe aren't as evolved as they could be. If you then can see that there are people in your team who are demonstrating great leadership qualities and are able to make decisions or able to make ideas, but also are influencing people, that can be quite challenging and threatening. And so sometimes you may find that as a non-titled leader, you may be getting yourself into trouble, but that's not a thing that you should be solving. It's an organizational issue, as far as I'm concerned.
For sure. I've got a little mini gift with what you were saying there. And this is a guy that I follow on LinkedIn called Justin Metcham, who has a newsletter called The Full Potential Zone. So it goes back to this point again about if you haven't got the title, but he's got great infographics. And one of the infographics that I came across that he's done recently is leadership is not a title, it is an action and an example, which plays to your point as well about it's a feeling or a whatever it might be. So that was just a little for that. I may well take it down a little bit of a different track. Is that all right with my next gift?
Yeah, yes. Because otherwise it's going to get very samey.
I've gone a bit wayward because I've got another couple, but oh God, which one do I go with next? I'm going to go with this one next. This, I'd like to hope. You remember when we were on our episode for International Women's Day and we were talking about hybrid working or working from home and those sort of like elements to it? I came across this lady called Dr. Sarah Beth Burke. What she calls herself is, if we're back to titles again, but she calls herself a hybrid professional identity. She's talking about being a hybrid professional, and that's her identity rather than anything else. And she has done a book with a workbook on More Than My Title. And it is about helping. I mean, I think she sets itself up for potentially more for women, but I think that this could help everybody, is that she is coming across in her book and in the workbook about career meets personal brand meets skills. And if you package all of that together, your career, your personal and your skills, who are you then? So you're not just one element to it, but you bring all of your things to bear. So I'm quite keen. I might get the workbook just to work through that to see. I think I do less of this now, especially now working as an independent. But I know that there were times in the past, younger years, I think, where the title really seemed to matter. And the older I got, the less it did, because it was more about what I was doing. So I think that there is an experience thing that goes along with this. And I know that I've had conversations in businesses where, I need my job title changed and I need manager in it and I need this and I need that because that's how I get acclaimed in the outside world and all of that sort of like nightmare bollocks that goes on. But I can sort of understand it because if that's how we're all living, it's important to people. But I think that what this lady is saying in her book is that there's so much more to it than one avenue. So take a look at how you blend all of them together. And when that comes to fruition, you give yourself your own title.
Nice. I like that.
So I thought that was quite a nice exercise.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking back on this issue of how I think that maybe it is Northern, I don't even think it's a Northern European thing, the British and American, as I said, obsession with titles a little bit. I remember many years ago, and I must have been reading a book or seen something where someone from a Southern European country was talking about why we did this, how they found it strange that Americans and British people would always do this when they introduce each other. They'd ask what you do rather than, sort of go into sort of who you are and this sort of rounded explanation of yourself as a person. And I thought it was really interesting. And I remember I was invited by a boyfriend to a mess party. and was introduced to this subaltern who then did exactly that, said, "Oh, so what do you do?" And I answered it and I was smiling. It wasn't meant in any way a mean thing. I sort of said, "Isn't it funny that we always do that? We always ask what people do rather than have an interest in people as a more rounded human being." Apparently it's a very British thing. And he just looked at me as if I said something really crude about his mother and effectively just walked off in shock. And then I got elbowed in the ribs by the boyfriend who told me off for being rude. And I hadn't meant to be rude. I thought it was an interesting conversation starter. Needless to say, that relationship didn't last very long.
Well, good, because if he thought that was rude, he's not seen quite how rude you or I can be.
Well, there is that.
I was just going to say on that, I think the thing is, and I often am in this conversation in my coaching community, is that we spend so much of our lives thinking that we are this or that, or either or, when in fact, if we spent more of time thinking both and, so I don't know, if I think about my own stuff, I am a mother and I've worked in the corporate world. I am a sister and an aunt. But you're not just one thing. It's not linear. But I think that there is the premise of that as soon as you get into the only thing that defines you is your job or your title.
Yes. I love the idea of describing ourselves in a more holistic way and thinking of ourselves in a more holistic way as well. I think that being defined by your job also is so risky because, you know, a time where you might be made redundant or people move out of types of employment for various reasons. But then if you've always defined yourself by what you do, it can be really existentially challenging when you are no longer that.
Agreed.
So we've kind of digressed off a little bit, but hey, another of my gifts was going to be from Mark Sanborn. He has a book and TED Talk, and he talks particularly about leadership being a choice, again, rather than a title. And I quite like that idea. His book is You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader, but he focuses on this idea of it being a choice, and that you choose to engage in particular types of behaviors and honing different types of skills and behaving in a way that then goes into other commentators like Robin Sharma, who I'll talk about later, and John Maxwell, who you talked about at the last mini, who do lots of talking about that actually leadership is about influencing people. It's not a title. It's not a designation. I think Robin Sharma says this: impact, influence, and inspiration. And John Maxwell follows on those ideas. So I quite like that idea that everybody can be a leader. Everybody has the opportunity to inspire and influence people, whether that's in the corporate world or whether that's in their communities, whether that's in your school as a pupil, all of those opportunities to be a leader without actually calling yourself a leader or being called a leader.
Nice. What were the 3 words again? I like those. Impact,
influence, and inspiration. So
nice.
Get results, spread your passion, and inspire others.
Lovely. I really like that.
My third gift is I'm gifting you Robin Sharma. There you go. He has got lots and lots of information and resources, books and TED Talks. So I think the gift I've given is it's only a couple of minutes of him talking about what he thinks is leadership without a title. And he talks about the fact that you can practice it. He gives 4 practices that you can do daily. The first practice is to radiate positive energy, and that sort of links into this idea of inspiring and influencing. And he says that you should go in enthusiastically and full of energy. The second one is to use your best hours to do your best work. So his idea is that the first 90 minutes of the day or the first 90 minutes of your work day are the time where you should be focusing on important work, not the scrolling, catching up on emails, having a chat over the water cooler. That sounds a bit American, about what you did last night or what you did at the weekend. Focus on doing important things, influential things, and then you can do all of the sort of lower energy stuff later on in the day. The third practice is, and we've talked a lot about journaling, and this is sort of focused journaling in terms of you think about, reflect about 3 things that you did really well during the day, and note those down and aim to build on those things for the next day to do things better. And then for the fourth one, again, another thing that we've talked about a lot, and that is learning. Be a continuous learner. Always be open to learning something new and actually look out for learning something new. So that those were practices that he identified as sort of fundamental for all good leaders. But he talks a lot about this idea of that leadership isn't about your title, it's about how you behave. And so reflecting a lot on things that you've already said.
I love that. And that's in the link that you're putting in as the gift, is it? Those practices. Yeah. Again, that's excellent. Sort of same but different. My last one is from the School of Life. Have you come across them before?
No.
They do psychological education, there's therapeutic services, but they offer in business solutions as well. They're quite broad, but some really good stuff. And I've been to some of their events before, but they also have resources. And so they have this booklet that, again, you can actually do of your own from an exercise perspective called Who Am I? And I think this takes us all the way back round to the not what you do, but who you are. And so they take you through a whole load of questions to help you sort of accumulatively appreciate how rich your identity is.
Nice.
So you'll build and create a psychological portrait of yourself. And I think that, you know, whatever point in life or whatever role you might be filling or even if you're not working, whatever it might be, but just to do that, to sort of remember all parts of yourself, all the things that you actually are. I thought that was pretty cool and not a bad idea with the practices that you're talking about with being a leader. But where it needs to start from is that very strong sense of self.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. I think also really great practice for building self-confidence, self-belief, sort of dealing with what people call imposter syndrome. Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. Yay. Okay. Well, yeah, we're at our time for the end of this mini. Do you have a quote?
I don't. You see, this is where the confessional comes now. Now I feel my identity has been destroyed because I led with it. Positions are temporary. Ranks and titles are limited, but the way you treated people will always be remembered.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Bobby, and see you next week.
Thanks, Bridge. Bye.
Thanks for listening. All of the gifts are on our website or on our podcast page on Spotify. Next week, it's International Leadership Week. So we've compiled a basket of gifts for you, celebrating the theme of the power of collaborative leadership. So we hope you'll join us next week in Superpowering Collaboration.